We are. Hey, we are live now. Making sure that Instagram is live as well because it likes to do its own thing as it is doing right now, which is why I hate doing Instagram. Well, with that said, hey everybody, happy Friday. Welcome to Fran and Friends. When you see Fran, you already know it's Friday. And today I have a guest with me, Breanne Goldman. How we met is I was commenting on Mel Robbins' podcast, and she saw something that I said. I think she thinks it was enlightening. And after that, we just sparked off from there. And then the conversation turned into her being a guest on the podcast. So I am so in gratitude. As you can see, both of us are matching today. Can you say synchronicity? So I'm gonna read a little bit of Breanne's background, and then we can go straight into the conversation. And I'll just give the floor to you if that's okay with you, Breanne.
Go for it.
Okay. So Breanne, she specializes in supporting women in midlife ages 35 to 55 ish. So I fit in there. Who may not realize what they may be feeling is a sense of deep grief and dissatisfaction or languishing. They may be navigating a changing body, perimenopause, shifting relationships and roles, aging family members, career pivots, existential angst, and who are wondering, is this it? Is this all there is? Breanne, please take the floor.
Thank you so much for connecting and for having me on your lovely podcast for just tea and conversation, as I like to say.
Good.
Yeah. I'm really glad to be here and to chat and connect about. I think what so many people who identify as women may be feeling, but may not necessarily have a word for it or have. Like you alluded to, my bio, my introduction, feel like there's something there or something missing, but can't quite put their finger on it. Navigating life change, life transitions, and maybe feel a sense of shame or disconnection.
I could see that. Why would they feel a sense of shame with the transition?
I've worked with a lot of women who are quote unquote high achievers, driven, disciplined, did all the things they were told we're supposed to do, get the education, got the degrees, got the awards, the scholarships, the blah, 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 follow the path. Might identify as perfectionist, right? And having to do everything according to a script or follow someone else's plan. And so they might have a lot of what they worked hard for and may have really clawed their way up to get to where they are in life, but then still might feel a sense of shame for feeling like there's still something missing. Like I have all this stuff. I worked so hard to get to where I am in life and, all these other things. But there's still that nagging question of like, there's just something there and I don't know what it is. Right. And so I've heard from so many women over the years, so many clients that exact question, is this it? Is this all there is? It's like on repeat, Yeah. And what I want to say to that is because of this, there can be a sense of feeling broken and less than. And from where I'm sitting and from what I see in my lived experience, my professional experience as well, is that we're not broken. We are not broken. We just so happen to be a part of systems that are broken. And so because of that, we identify as part of these systems, whatever that might be, familial, cultural, societal, religious, whatever system we might be a part of that might have its challenges or brokenness. And so because we are by default an extension of these systems, we then start to feel like we are broken ourselves. And
Wow.
we're not broken. We're just maybe feeling a sense of being lost.
That's so powerful. Because, like you said, living in the shadow of somebody else or in the shadow of a system where the roles that we used to know are no longer roles. They have shifted in such a tremendous way where men used to be the breadwinners and women weren't. And now that dynamic has shifted dynamically.
And you really touched on something, that word role, that we identify as our career, our job title, our accomplishments, our place in our families, our whatever role that we might be fitting into, we then tend to identify and, dare I say, over-identify with these aspects of our identity that are inherently going to change and shift. And so because we identify with these things that will inherently change and shift, we are destined to suffer. I mean, that's the nature of being embodied, right?
Yeah, so it's like trying to wear a pair of pants from first grade that you can no longer fit.
Yes. Yes. That's brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah.
In what ways do you see people identifying and over-identifying, for those that aren't familiar with some of those terms? If you could break it down in layman's terms for them.
So which terms exactly? I threw a lot of stuff out there.
Like when you were talking about roles and identifying and over-identifying. So let's say if they're a mother and then now that their children are in college, and they could still have that role, but the responsibilities are no longer what they used to be.
Absolutely.
Because they're becoming more self-sufficient.
Yeah. And it's not to say that those roles disappear when our life circumstances change or shift. They're always necessarily going to be there, but they might just be evolving or shape-shifting, right? Changing form. Just like we live in these bodies. I live in the same body that was wearing a certain pair of pants when I was in first grade, right? Yeah. I still live in that same body, but I have just grown and evolved and shifted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I always go back to this one quote that change is the only thing that's constant. And the fight between, I think this goes back into the whole role playing thing of systems. Like, how do people adapt and learn how to change with that evolving? Like how, I think we're fed this ideology of being secure or stable, in which those are good and great things. But I think for the system that we live in, you had mentioned earlier that it's broken. Like, how do those two come together? How can we create pieces so we can compartmentalize and live in a structure where we can be like our best self or reconnect with what feels true for us? I don't know if you understood anything.
I did. That is a big question. So one of my teachers years ago would say, I live in the world, but I am not of it. I live in the world, but I'm not of it. And what I took that to mean is he lives in and participates in these systems and these structures and how society organizes itself. And yet he doesn't necessarily have to identify as necessarily extensions of the brokenness, where he's maybe identifying more as the wholeness. in the world is this whole thing, right? But to be of something is to be separate, to be distinct from.
Okay. So really more an observer, maybe.
Yeah, an observer, but also an active participant. You know, it's it's such a tricky thing. It's the yes and,
Hmm.
right? It's the liminal space where we're not
What's
necessarily
what's liminal?
liminal space. Yeah. Oh, that is. So it's like the gray area. Think of it as like a doorway between one room and the next. So it's that space between worlds, between realities, between physical spaces, emotional spaces, mental spaces.
Hmm.
It's neither here, it's neither there, it's the in between,
So the transition.
the transition. Yeah.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah. And the more that we can practice getting a little bit comfortable with that discomfort of being in that transitional space, we have greater access to our capacity, our ability to hold opposites at the same time, good, bad, because we're bound to suffer either way.
Hmm.
We are bound to suffer either way. We attach ourselves to wanting things to continue the way that they are. And so we cling to the wanting and the things that we like, the things that we want to continue. And then we categorically reject or push away the things that we don't want.
Hmm.
And so we are bound to suffer either way. And so the more that we can practice, because it is a lifelong practice, practice being with both. That is some of the deepest spiritual work that we will ever be called to do, especially when things get real.
Yeah, I'm like, that is some difficult things to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Trying to accept, I guess, a disappointment, maybe, or an outcome that we didn't want.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I thought of two things. Like, it almost sounds like disassociation. And then I'm thinking about like the movie The Matrix, how when they were shifting into worlds, they'd plug in or pull out a disc and shift into the different spaces that they needed to go to and become whatever it was that space needed at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I should add to that is, being in the yoga and wellness world for so long, there is so much spiritual bypassing, and that's, a big word, but like love and light and rainbows and unicorns, and I'm going to be all the touchy feely and just look at the good stuff and, ignore the stuff I don't want to be a part of. But that's not what this is, right? It's being able to hold two realities simultaneously, and our human brains have a really, really hard time doing that, right? And it's being able to sit with and be with the positives, the good things, whatever that might look like or feel like, and also sit with and be with the disappointments, the deep grief, the sadness, and be with it rather than sit in it.
Mm.
So sit with it rather than sit with it rather than sit in it.
Can you explain the two?
Yeah. Yeah. To be with is to hold it, right? To sit with the grief.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting with this. I'm holding this. Whereas if I'm sitting in it, I think of myself as taking like a mud bath and just being completely covered in it and having a really hard time pulling myself out of it. If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. No, could you repeat the last thing that you just said? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, it's just such a practice. Such a practice.
Because like I was thinking about myself when I had mentioned about my son, him being incarcerated, and I had taken like 3 months off of social media because of what that felt like. I felt engulfed in it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I shifted into sitting with it. And you are right. It is a practice because, like, when I was engulfed, I felt entrenched. I felt overwhelmed. I felt the sense of helplessness. Yeah. And then as I had started to shift my mind frame into acceptance and allowance, I started to move, I think, more with the grief versus in that space of encompassing and, like you said, embodying it.
Yeah.
How for you have you navigated this space?
Do you have years to talk? um, I'll start by saying grief, as uncomfortable and as awful as it can feel, especially when we are in it, can be our greatest source of wisdom.
Mm.
Grief can truly be one of our greatest gifts that we will ever be invited to navigate as an unwelcome guest.
I was gonna say, like, invited. I was like, I don't want that guest.
Yeah. And that goes back to, one of the causes of suffering, one of the aspects of suffering is that we want to push away the stuff that we don't want, and we want to replicate and keep focusing on the things that we do want. And so either way, we're bound to suffer.
Mm.
So how do I navigate grief? How do I be with grief? The most simple, like the simplest and most accessible, is to simply come back to the breath. And I know we might hear that a lot, and there's a reason why. Our breath is our connection to something greater than ourselves. Whether we believe in God, whether we don't, whether we believe in something bigger than us ourselves, we are a part of something. And our breath, inspiration, is our connection to the divine, and however we imagine that, however that shows up for us. And so when I'm feeling really in it and I'm feeling all the feels and I'm having a very difficult time catching my breath because of the grief, sometimes that grief feels like it's just weighing so hard on my heart, I can't move. I come back to the spaces between the breath, that space between the inhale and the exhale. And so back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago is the liminal space, right? That space is space between worlds. It's like a doorway. Mm-hmm. That transition, because that's a reminder. It's a very visceral, it's a very felt, embodied reminder that nothing's permanent. As fleeting and as brief as that space is between the inhale and the exhale, it's still there and it's still space, and that represents possibility. And so in those moments of grief and despair that so many of us are being called to be with in this moment, it can be such a powerful reminder to remember and reconnect to that space between breath, that we always have that available to us. It connects us to possibility, to space, again, to something greater than ourselves and whatever we feel or believe. And again, it's also a practice. It's also a practice.
As you were saying that, I was like, oh yeah, I needed to breathe. I was breathing as you were talking. I was like, yeah, friend, breathe, remember to breathe.
Yeah, most of us, like we hold our breaths. We breathe from up here, and that really limits our ability to ground. Right. And to speak with conviction from deep here, speak from our abdomen, speak from our gut, rather than up here where we can feel constricted and kind of held back and restrained.
Talk about that. Because like I was doing something in ChatGPT, and it was talking about like speaking things with more of a deeper conviction. Mm-hmm. And I felt the only way that I could do that is like talking from my abdomen, because I felt like there's a different vibration that comes with saying affirmation like, I am aligned with my highest purpose, and embrace my unique strengths versus up here, I'm aligned with my highest purpose and embrace my unique strengths. It's head talk versus, I wouldn't call it heart talk, but
I would.
Yeah, heart talk.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
This is the home of wisdom right here.
Okay.
This is the home of wisdom. And the deeper we can connect to this and then ground ourselves either through our feet or through our legs, we're from an energetic place, we're drawing up the grounding of the earth. That feeling, that stability underneath our feet, our seat, however we are, feeling that support. And when we feel supported, we can show up a little bit differently.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody, I don't know, Melissa Carmichael, she said mud bath is such a good visual for sitting in your grief versus with it.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. All right. And then how do people, so you said the breath is one thing to reconnect ourselves with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other techniques that we can use to help us to reconnect with ourselves as well?
So many. Another one I like to offer is what I just alluded to or mentioned a moment ago, is to feel the ground beneath your feet. Okay. Feel the seat that you're sitting on, any supports that are holding you. If we're feeling unsteady, uncertain, it can be helpful to lean up against a wall and to feel that, feel that support.
Okay.
Yes. Like it feels different, right?
Yeah, it does.
Different. Another one is to just lie down.
So you can have that stability.
Yeah. Because the nature of grief is there's a sense of change and unsteadiness and uncertainty and heaviness, right? And so it's important to really tap into that inherent sense of support, that support that is always accessible to us. And at the same time, right, back to the yes and, to allow movement. It is so important to invite movement of the body, of the breath, the mind, the heart. So from a physical place, from a subtle and energetic place, to move. Because what happens when we are feeling grief is a sense of stuckness. Not always, right? I never want to speak in platitudes or overgeneralizations, but typically we can feel a sense of stuck. And when we feel stuck, what happens then is that translates to stuckness in the body. And from an energetic place, that stuck energy lodges itself in our joints, in our bones, in our tissues, and the body has a memory to it. And so the more that we can move, even if we feel like we can't get out of bed, because I've had chapters in my life where I could not get out of bed, the grief and the loss and the despair was just too much to handle. I couldn't get out of bed, but I just moved my fingers. I moved my feet, my knees, movement of the neck. I mean, even as simple as that. Yeah. Like it's accessible. It's accessible. And that's really the key, is that we don't have to engage in these elaborate practices or buy expensive products or buy into the whole capitalist narrative that we have to go out and spend money in order to feel better. No, we are our own best healer. And it starts by the simplest, the smallest of gestures, by breathing, by gently moving the body and connecting back to our heart.
That's beautiful. I'm going to recap for those of you that are just joining us. Breanne said for us to reconnect with ourselves, a few of the things. One of them is breathing. And she mentioned the little space between the inhale and the exhale. What is that called, Breanne?
I mean, there's different words for it, but the liminal space, or just
Well,
the spaces, the space between inhale and exhale, right at the top, right at the bottom.
okay.
Mhm.
That she also mentioned lying on the floor so we can have some stability. Also leaning back against the wall or a chair, something flat, right? And then in addition to movement. And I love that you said how accessible using our fingers or even our feet. I don't have that much flexibility, so I would pick my toes up and do it. I'll leave that to
Everything counts.
you. Okay.
Everything counts.
Yeah. And I love just the whole head thing. These are small things and they are so accessible, so easy. Thank you for sharing those pieces with us.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more, but that's kind of the overview, and simple. Keep it simple.
So, how did you get into this kind of work?
As a yoga therapist,
Yeah.
ooh, so I'll try to kind of give a broad overview. So I'm a former retired middle and high school teacher.
Okay.
And at the time, I was teaching in Chicago, and had a very, it was just challenging, let's just say. It was my favorite school I've taught at, but it was just profoundly challenging. And I found a yoga studio down the street as a hot yoga studio, and very physically based, 90-minute hot practice, 26 postures in a room that's heated to 105 degrees with 40% humidity. So intense. And really got into that world, that hot yoga world I was in that world for maybe 14 years. I taught it for a long time, but it's very rigid. And there's a benefit to that, and having the same sequence every time, and the intensity of it. The intensity of that practice really helped me navigate a very difficult world that's just hard to navigate in any body. I realized, okay, if I can endure this intensity in this space, I can take this out into the world, and everything's a piece of cake, right? Right. If I can do this really intense practice mentally, right, and physically, if I can handle that in here, I can handle anything out there in the world. And so that's really what got me into yoga in general. But it's a very, I'll just say, ego-based practice, and I have since shifted away from that particular practice. And as I started to dive much deeper into yoga, capital Y yoga, I started to unlearn some of the really unhelpful and unharmful narratives that we are taught in the West in general about what yoga is about, and started to explore much deeper what yoga can offer. And so yoga in Sanskrit means union, to yoke together. And we can think of that as bridging small s, so small s self with big S capital self, meaning our changing self versus our unchanging self.
Our higher self.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the more I started to learn and really dive into the studies, and then teaching from a completely different lens, I started to realize, I've been feeling so disconnected from myself. If this is what yoga is about, it's not about the postures. It's not about being able to kick your foot over your head. I mean, that's not what it is, right? It's feeling connected to that unchanging higher self, right? And how I ultimately show up in the world. And the deeper I've gotten into my studies and my practices, the more layers I've been uncovering and discovering about myself, and which led me to ultimately to, well, not ultimately, but one major revelation is learning and being diagnosed at age 42 that I'm autistic. And so the more that we peel back these layers of the constructed self, and even autism is a constructed aspect of my identity. It's a role, right? It doesn't define me. It's a part of me. It absolutely informs how I move through the world. but it's not me necessarily. And so yoga has really helped me learn that about myself, and also realize that I and so many of us have we outsource our own healing. We look to others to fix us because we think we're broken, right? We look to other systems and people and products and things and all these aspects outside of us to heal us, right? We're looking outward, whereas yoga, capital Y, yoga, invites us to look more inward, and that we are ultimately our own best healer. Now, it can be really helpful to have a guide on our side to help us, right? And so the way that I describe my work as a yoga therapist is my clients bring the compass, right? The general direction of where they want to go, how they want to feel or be, right? Where they're at right now, and kind of the general direction. And as the yoga therapist, I can help co-create the roadmap to get there. So either using specific breathing practices, movement practices, subtle energy practices, mantra, scriptural study. I work with a lot of clients who have no yoga background. They've never stepped into a yoga studio. They're feeling yoga is not for them, right? For many, many reasons. I have clients who are devoutly religious. I mean, it's yoga is ultimately for everybody. And so my role and my passion is to meet people where they are with the roadmap that we co-design together. And so it's I became the yoga therapist that I needed for most of my life, right? I learned to become an exquisite listener to myself and what I need, and to really honor that. And then because I have made it a lifelong practice to show up for myself, even and especially when it gets hard. Also a practice. Because I so value showing up for myself, I have more capacity and more ability to try to show up for others. And again, some days are really difficult, especially when dealing with grief. That's where these daily practices of either getting on my mat here or just sitting in my chair, leaning up against the wall and noticing my breath. That's it. That's the work. That's the practice.
So for people that are, like you mentioned, that don't know anything about yoga, or just in general, like how you said that we outsource a lot of our healing to other things, like how would they know that they're not leaning into their own wisdom?
Oh, that's a big question. A number of reasons, or possible reasons. I would say near the top of the list is trauma. When we are navigating and experiencing trauma, and however that shows up, it can feel challenging to trust ourselves. And so what I would offer then is lean on our supports, right? Lean on the supports that you do have, whether it's a trusted friend or family member, if you need to just talk something out. Reconnecting with nature, feeling like you're part of the natural world. Because there is so much wisdom there that is beyond words and beyond language, right? And so when we're navigating really difficult times in our lives, trying to wade through trauma, wade through grief, connecting with nature, family and friends, something that maybe like a hobby that we might gravitate towards, something that can help us feed our heart, our soul. Because again, I know I keep coming back to this, but it's just so important, is that this is the home of wisdom right here. It's beyond words. And so when we can really connect with this, our heart wisdom, we can start to practice to trust ourselves and listen and honor to what we need, right? When it's the Quaker tradition and some other traditions view it as listening to that still small voice within, getting still and quiet enough to hear that stillness, and that wisdom will emerge over maybe informing us what we need. And coming back to the question around outsourcing our healing, this is not to say that we don't need doctors and we don't need other healthcare providers. That's not at all what I'm saying. I mean, Western medicine has saved my life, right? I need these other people and systems and tools, but it's the difficulty or the challenge comes when we don't necessarily take accountability and responsibility for ourselves, and we expect others to give us a pill or fix us in whatever way, rather than us looking within and saying, okay, how can I be an active participant in my own healing to the extent and my ability that I'm able to? And those are really powerful questions and challenging.
I really enjoyed what you said about reconnecting with nature, that it's the wisdom beyond language. And I thought about the sunset. Like when we stand and we look at the sunset, the word exquisite or the word beautiful, the word, whatever description we try to use, magnificent, isn't enough to describe the majesticness of what it is that we are encountering in that moment.
Beyond words.
Yeah, definitely beyond words. So thank you for that description. I enjoyed that. So when you told us earlier that like if we are outside of ourselves, to lean on our family and friends to reconnect with nature, and then also find like whatever our hobby is that brings us back into our heart space.
Cool. And another way to look at that when we're feeling, and I think this can be particularly helpful in this moment, this collective moment that we find ourselves in, is tapping into what's called an inner resource. An inner resource of being is a sense of unchanging peace, unchanging timelessness. We can feel or imagine maybe a particular place on earth, like an actual physical location that helps us feel a sense of peace, a sense of groundedness, a sense of okayness. Maybe it's a person in our lives. Maybe it's a word or a feeling, whatever it is for you. Keep that in your awareness, in your heart, in your mind, especially when things get really difficult. We can think of it as like an anchor.
Yeah, we definitely need those anchors in our life. Yeah. And one of the last questions, because we're closing in on the last 15 minutes, which I like to do a little round robin. What, for those that are just watching for the first time, what is yoga therapy for people that have no clue?
Yoga therapy is a multisensory, meaning an approach, a therapeutic approach that uses physical, energetic, mental, emotional, spiritual ways of connecting with our sense of who we are. Oh, Fran, I lost you. I don't see you.
You're on the solo layout.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah, that threw me for a loop there.
Oh, yeah.
So multisensory, tapping into all these different aspects of being through sight, sound, smell, touch. I'm missing one. Taste, right? So using our senses to connect with ourselves. Yoga therapy is a way of healing that helps us bring ourselves back into ourselves. And so another way I describe it is you don't have to do a single posture. Like you don't have to kick your foot over your head or, put yourself into a pretzel shape. I rarely offer any of those to my clients. It's meeting you where you are, what you need in the moment, and how I can help you get there. And so it's interesting. I've actually been shifting away from necessarily using the phrase yoga therapist. I think it's really important, the language that we use, but it can also be very, it can be inaccessible, right? Because I think a lot of times in Western culture, we have, again, this not misinformed. I'm blanking on words, but just maybe like a general understanding of what yoga is. And it's so much more than that. It's a holistic, whole person approach to healing. Right. So
you say that it's a lifestyle?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So the framework that I use is it's called the Panchamaya Kosha model, which is a fancy word, which means basically the five layers of self. Yeah. So we have the physical body, right? We have what we can see and touch and bones and hair, all of it, right? Like that's the physical aspect. And then there's the energetic aspect, which we can sometimes associate with the breath. And then moving into more subtle aspects of ourselves is the mind and our thoughts and how we see the world, right? And then even more subtle than that is a sense of our higher self, our intuition, our beliefs, our emotions. And then even more subtle than that is our spiritual self. And so when one aspect of ourself feels imbalanced or compromised, let's just say, everything else is affected. And so very surface level example is somebody comes to me with low back pain, very common ailment, right? Their back hurts, they have a hard time moving, hard time walking. What I'm looking at is not just the low back pain, right? I mean, of course, we start with where you are and how to help you move through the world with a little bit more ease and whatever that means for you, right? So of course, I'm going to be looking at that, but I'm also looking at, okay, how does that back pain affect your energy level? How is that back pain affecting the breath? Are we still breathing up here? Does the back pain affect us, our ability to breathe a little bit more deeper into the deeper lobes of the lungs, right? The diaphragm. I'm also looking at the mind, right? Our thoughts that we have about the back pain and identifying with the back pain. And then I'm also looking at maybe my limiting beliefs about who I am in the world because of my back pain. And then even deeper, right? I'm looking at how is this affecting you as a spiritual being? And so that's a very long-winded way of saying that's 50,000 foot overview of yoga therapy is a system of whole person healing rooted in yogic science, several thousand years old, Ayurvedic medicine and science, also several thousand years old, the traditional Indian system of medicine, and then traditional Western evidence-based medicine. So these are the three schools of science that I use. And of course, it's also an art, right? It's meeting people where they're at and getting creative with what might help that person in the moment, and then also big picture, more sustainably.
Yeah, I like that you use that word, that it's an art, because I mean, I think we sometimes forget that we were created And we are creative beings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'll take some creativity to shift us and move us into a space that we want to see for ourselves, almost sculpting almost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another way I describe it is, we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the tools and the practices and the techniques of yoga, or if we don't want to use the word yoga, right, healing, let's just say. And then there's the spiritual dimension. And again, however we define that for ourselves. And the more that we can connect with that spiritual aspect of ourselves, that can help us alleviate suffering. Because from what I do, my role is to help my clients and the people who seek my guidance or the guidance of anybody in my line of work, is to find the root cause of suffering. And that is that we have forgotten that we are spiritual beings. And so it's always bringing ourselves back to the unchanging higher self. Again, also a practice, lifelong practice.
Yeah, like it's a holistic view. Like
Mm-hmm.
the physical symptom is just underlying of what maybe your emotional, mental, spiritual, all those things are connected. It's not just one thing. It is just one thing leading to another of a whole.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, there's this book that I love sharing. Have you heard about it? It's called The Secret Language of the Body.
Yeah.
Yeah, love
Yeah.
that book. Yeah, that's so deep.
Yeah. That's basically the core of what I do. Yeah. Because we sometimes forget, understandably, we sometimes forget that everything's connected.
Yeah.
Everything is always connected. Right.
So you
So
guys
I
heard it.
can't offer you a pill. I can't offer you a pill. I can't fix you. You're not broken. But I can offer you a practice to help you reconnect to yourself and to your soul and your
I love
spirit.
that. I love that. A pill versus a practice.
Yeah.
And like she said earlier, Western medicine is here as both can be used as tools for yourself. And we should also be self informed on what works for us.
Yeah.
And what you need for that time frame. So we are shifting into the part of our portion where I ask a few questions so the people can get to know you a little bit more deeper. Not that they didn't already, but I think you provided us like with a lot of great insight, and I really enjoyed it. So I hope the viewers are enjoying it as well. So my first question for the evening is, what does your morning routine look like?
What a juicy question. The moment I wake up, before I even open my eyes, that moment, right? That liminal space, that transitional space, before I open my eyes, place my hand on my heart,
Mm-hmm.
and I just feel what's present. I just connect to whatever unfiltered feeling or emotion comes through. Because I connect with myself before I immediately start looking out at the world.
So you said you connect like when you're laying in bed, whatever it is that you wake up feeling, that's what you connect with?
Because I'm connecting with myself, capital S.
Okay.
So there's a Sanskrit term, it's called Atma Tattva Avalokanam, which means roughly witnessing the self. So I'm witnessing myself, capital S, and maybe it's a feeling that comes through, or a word or a phrase, mantra, whatever it is that will naturally arise. And I just stay there for a few breaths, checking in before I immediately check out in the world.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
That's my first moments, and then I get right on this mat and or elsewhere if I can, and we'll sit. Contemplation. So starting the day again in contemplation and just noticing, moving the body gently. I have a pretty set practice, but it does evolve bits and pieces based on the day and kind of how I'm feeling.
I'm finding that like as I move less, I see more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Stillness. That's where it lies, right there. That's the magic.
Yeah. What is your favorite holiday movie, and what does it say about you?
Oh my gosh. The very first thing that came to mind was what is it? The Charlie Brown pumpkin movie. I'm
Okay.
blanking on the name of it. It's
I've seen the Charlie Brown movie. I don't know.
The Great Pumpkin, maybe. I mean, it was from my
Probably.
childhood. Yeah, that's the very first thing that came to my mind. I tend not to watch a lot of, I guess, pop culture movies. I kind of live under a rock in that way, but that's the best I can do.
It is all good.
Yeah.
It is all good. So, what are 3 books, movies, or podcasts you would recommend to listeners, and why?
Books, movies, or podcasts I'd recommend. The first book is by Pema Chodron, a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and it's called When Things Fall Apart.
Oh, you posted about that the other day.
I did. I have a very tattered copy with the pages are literally falling out. I mean, it has been with me for a long time through a lot of pain and grief. So When Things Fall Apart, highly recommend. Podcast. So many good podcasts. On Being with Krista Tippett. She's taking a break now, but she was on air for a long time. But the first version of it was called Speaking of Faith. It was on in the early 2000s, and On Being is the most recent version.
BEING?
Yeah, BEING. So, she has a lot of people on there that who are social activists, religious leaders, spiritual leaders, a lot of different topics. And just basically the idea is on being embodied, on just being a human.
Okay.
Another one I would recommend, I guess I would say the Mel Robbins podcast. Yeah, she's just got such good pieces of wisdom on there.
Yeah.
And just, I guess, how she presents herself is really lovely,
And you never know who you'll meet.
That's so true. Truth.
Well, I would like for you to share with people where they can find you. And thank you for sharing those 3 pieces of wisdom. She mentioned, I think, please forgive me if I'm wrong, the book When Things Fall Apart by Pema
CHO.
Okay.
RON. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then she also mentioned the podcast On Being with Christy Tippett, and then the Mel Robbins podcast. So where can people find you? What new things are you working on? And do you have any events coming up where people can find you?
Yeah. So you can find me at my website, BreanneGoldman.com. And I'm also active on LinkedIn at Breanne Goldman. I am putting together a couple of workshops. So one is I'm looking at starting sometime in January, Grief, Courage, and Creativity.
Like it.
Grief, courage, and creativity are inherently connected. We cannot separate those 3. I'll be sharing a lot more about that in my LinkedIn post soon.
Sweet.
And another one is Yoga, Ayurveda, and Perimenopause. So I'll be offering a free class, free workshop, webinar on that coming soon. My plan was to offer that in a couple weeks, and that's not happening. So we're looking at, again, early January. I'm also an artist, so it's art season. So I'm in it at the moment. Yeah, so that's coming early January as well. So small group yoga therapy, so small group with several people who are navigating similar challenges, but again, customized to the group. And then, of course, I do also offer fully customized one-on-one programs that will meet you where you're at. So 3-month and 6-month programs designed for deep transformation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you did for yourself, so that way people can navigate the space too, so that you can be a guide for them. Appreciate that. Thank you
When we
for
show
doing
up for ourselves, we
that.
can show up for others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, Breanne told you where you can find her. And if you still have trouble, hit me up. I will be putting up her information also on the links below on YouTube, in addition to LinkedIn. So thank you so much for your time. Everyone have a great Friday. And once again, Breanne, thank you for your energy. Could you hold on for just a minute while I end the podcast?
Thank you.
You're welcome.